Hey folks, on this episode we're going to check out Nate Parker's most recent directorial contribution, American Skin, which is currently available on Amazon Prime. That, and the usual, on this episode of The Monitors. Sometimes when I'm looking for something to watch to tell you folks about, I'm surprised by a movie that I don't see coming. This time it's the very timely American Skin, currently available for rent on Amazon Prime. American Skin is produced by Spike Lee and directed by actor, writer, and director Nate Parker, whose most recent directorial effort before this was Birth of a Nation. Even though American Skin was shot more than a couple years ago, it hasn't seen a domestic release until now. But the subject matter is eerily current. Though a fictitious film, the story is snatched from today's headlines, as it centers on an Iraqi Marine War veteran named Lincoln Jefferson, played by Parker, whose 14-year-old son, Kajani, is killed by police in what appears to be a routine traffic stop. When the police officer who killed Kajani is not charged in the shooting, Lincoln decides to lay siege to the police department where the officer works, takes the officers in the precinct hostage, and places the officer himself on trial. He also does this with a student documentary film crew that he throws into the situation so that the event can be documented. First, the film itself is well done. I know that directing a film is inherently challenging, and there are not many directors who can successfully manage the film while also starring in it. Parker's one of the few directors who seems to be able to pull this off successfully. He also wrote the script, which, despite its unlikely premise, is smartly and responsibly written. Parker manages to inject the conversations into the trial that we expect to hear and that we need to hear. There is no telling a story like this without presenting arguments from all sides of it. While it is clear which side of the argument the film falls on, it is nice to hear multiple arguments and articulated intelligently, and unintelligently, and passionately. The arguments work so well that you would swear that this film was written during the latter half of 2020. The dialogue is credible, and it works under these circumstances. Parker's direction is also pretty much spot on. His use of the camera works really well for this story. The beginning of the film is largely told using captured video, which scared me into thinking this was going to be a found footage film. I can't stand those. But instead, Parker uses the camera's POV to provide a perspective, and the film plays with perspective quite a bit. You could argue that that is the point, as you sometimes feel like an awkward witness to the events unfolding. The performances are also intense and riveting. Parker's own performance of Lincoln Jefferson is captivating. His story is heartbreaking, and Parker is able to break your heart with a surprisingly precise performance. When you meet Lincoln a year after the shooting, you instantly like him and sympathize with him. When he takes the police precinct, you aren't tempted to judge him. The rest of the cast brings it as well. Omari Hardwick provides moral support as Link's war buddy and close friend Omar. We also get appearances from OG's Vanessa Bell Calloway and Michael Warren, who you might miss if you're not paying attention. But the actors who contribute to the mock trial are the ones who give the film its heart. Theo Rossi, who plays Officer Reyes, does some of the best work I've seen from him, and Bo Knapp, who plays accused Officer Randall, is also very compelling. I won't go into listing all the performers, but everyone in those scenes were absolutely committed to telling the story whether they were speaking or not, and the film works because those scenes are solid due to that commitment. Credit must also go to Shane Paul McGee, who plays the young filmmaker Jordan, who is reluctantly roped into this event, whose climactic, poignantly written and performed speech is ultimately the theme of the film. Even though American Skin will remind you of John Q, American Hangman, Fruitvale Station, and several other films, it deserves credit for standing on its own and being unapologetically clear with its message. That's not to say I have no issues with the film, but those issues are directly tied to parts of the story and not the execution in its telling, so I will refrain from mentioning them to stay out of the spoiler territory. And I'll admit my initial observation that the first act pacing was awkward and clunky was premature. In retrospect, it makes sense given the hybrid documentary/cinematic narrative style that Parker uses. Since political and social perceptions of the world have changed significantly during 2020, it might explain why the film now has a 5-star rating on Amazon Prime. When it premiered at the Venice Film Festival a couple of years ago, I understand it met with mixed reviews and has low critic scores on Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. But audience approval is virtually the opposite. Now, I try to avoid reading other critiques of a film before I do my own, so while I can guess what the criticisms might be for this film, I find the film to be well made and worthwhile. I'm also a big believer that meaningful conversations by sincere individuals, whether they're of like minds or opposing viewpoints, are the first steps of building bridges. Whether you agree with the message of American Skin or not, there is certainly much to discuss after viewing this film, especially these days. Have you seen American Skin yet? If you have, what did you think? Do you agree with my review, or do you completely disagree? I want to know. Please leave your comments below. Let's start a meaningful conversation. Also, if you would, please give us a like. Working hard to bring you new content. And also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notified about new content. We'll see you next week with a new review. Meantime, you guys be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Peace, and we're out. God bless.